Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Bros and foes and heroes. Gonna tell you about bros and foes and heroes. Gonna tell you about
comic books, costumes,
Facts, boots.
and other stuff.
In this week's issue, Superman, the Tax Evader, and a special interview with Reed Tucker.
Welcome into Bros, Foes, and Heroes. I am Zach, joined as always by the money man, Mr. Mike.
Boy, oh boy.
I know you gave me that little
That's the wrong guy.
look. Money man today because it's a holiday in a
Is it?
sense. Yeah, kind of.
It's
For
the
some,
worst holiday of the season.
It is the worst holiday of the season
Yeah.
for some. It's tax day, people.
Bluck.
I know that a lot of people for their podcast might have special like holiday themes, and we've done it before in the past. We had, Christmas comics for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure once it comes October again,
We did
look into
romance
some-
for Valentine's.
Exactly.
Sure.
We'll dive into some spooky stuff. I thought, why
Yeah.
not celebrate
Spooky stuff.
with the tax time extravaganza?
All right.
Here on Bros, Foes, and Heroes.
Come on in, dancing girls.
No,
Oh.
we didn't have the budget for that.
Oh, sorry.
See, I did our
We talked
taxes.
about it.
No, yeah, we did, but I did our taxes for the show and realized we owe actually at the end of this year.
Oh, I'm sure we do.
So I had to cancel. I had to cancel some of the plans.
Yeah.
Also,
do we still get the little guy who sets himself on
no,
fire?
we don't get anything.
Dang it.
No money. So actually, oddly enough, we don't even have enough, at least for just this episode, for comics for the entire episode, and we're gonna
Wow.
have to kind of cut it.
Okay.
But the way we're going to cut it's going to be different because we have a first here on Bros
Yeah,
this
we
week.
do.
We have a guest and a guest interview of somebody whose book that I've talked about plenty of times over the years.
Mr. Mixelplex.
No,
Oh.
we talked about him with Superman
Oh.
a couple weeks ago. No, Reed Tucker.
Reed
The
Tucker.
author of...
otherwise known as that Green Lantern.
No, that was Hal Jordan.
Oh.
But the author
Green Arrow.
of the author of Slugfest, the 50-year battle between
Yeah.
Marvel and DC. It's
Super
a book that
nice
I
guy.
referenced a lot. A lot of great stories in the book. If you haven't read it, I recommend you go ahead and doing it. But he was nice enough to go ahead and give us some time to talk to him about that book, as well as
Yep.
we kind of got to talk a little bit about James Gunn and the
We did.
DCU.
Yeah.
Reed, not only as an author, worked in covering movies for the New York Post for about 10 years, I believe, as well. So we kind of got his thoughts about that too. Just a great interview and just really big for me. Again, I can't tell you how excited I was, and I Mike can attest. I nerded out about it.
Oh, yeah.
But it is-
But it was great.
It was fantastic. It's one of the 3 books. I told him this, and I'll tell everybody else this too, that if you're like, hey, I want to, actually learn more about the history of comics.
Yeah.
It's Reed Tucker's book about the Slugfest. It's Sean Howe's Marvel history, and then it's all the Marvels. Like, those are the 3
Yeah.
best books
Yeah.
that I've read about. There's others out there
Wait,
that I would love
all
to hunt
the
down.
marbles. What do you mean?
All the Marvels, and I wish I would have
Is that
prepped
a
more.
play on all the marbles?
Maybe.
Okay.
But it is, and I apologize for not having the author's name on me right now. Mike will look it up.
Yep.
But what it is the
It's
author.
Reed Tucker. No, it's
No,
not.
it's the author went through and read every single Marvel comic.
Oh, wow.
Like, and he talks about like, it's best to kind of jump around, not like read chronologically through it. But what he does,
Douglas Wolk.
yes, Douglas Wolk. And so what Douglas Wolk does is the chapters it gives one chapter of like telling about a character, and it interweaves things that are going on with the story and the character and things that are going on like behind the scenes and like the creation of it all. So it's just a really cool like look into stuff. Like the first chapter is about Fantastic Four, and he like starts with how like Fantastic Four started and like some big things that happen along the way, not only storyline but also like creative wise too. And so it's a really good read. There's another book that I've been hunting down that I'll read here soon too. That's called 10 Cent Plague, but it's about the like the ban on comic books there in the 50s after Dr. Frederick Wortham testified in front of Congress, along with Bill Gaines from EC Comics. We talked about that a little bit, about how they thought that comics were, too violent and too...
David Hadju.
For the 10 Cent Plague?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's another one. I've always loved to read. Not only do I love reading comics and, reading the stories like this to get lost kind of in an... I use comics as escape growing up a lot. And so it's just cool to kind of go back and read this stuff now. But in the older I get, I've always been very intrigued in the historical aspect of stuff. I like to see how the sausage is made. So I love learning more about the behind the scenes stuff, but also I'm a big nonfiction fan of, figuring out why things were the way they are and how we got there. So Reed Tucker coming up after the break. But before we do that, I did say it was a tax time extravaganza. So I have for you, Mike.
I think you need to find a different word. I'm not sure it's an extravaganza if we don't have dancing girls.
Oh, it's a tax time special.
There we go.
Okay. But we have, I know we just finished up our series with Superman stories. This one is a bit different, and we'll go ahead and get into it. It was fun, but it's very fitting for our tax time special. And it is a story that was printed from an old Superman back in the Silver Age. And I, for one, always loved the Silver Age Superman that we have. And this one is an old story called Superman Owes $1 Billion. And what we have to start it off, as it shows, is that there's a Hotel Metropolis sign. Huh?
Did you say you sent it to me?
I emailed it to you.
I don't see it.
Oh. Well.
That's
It's
fine.
there.
It's okay.
I'll just show you. I mean, it's old. If we have, just so you can.
Oh, there it is.
There you go. So it's a Hotel Metropolis sign.
Okay.
This is old, like, Kurt Swan drawn Superman. It looks like you would want it to. But this Hotel Metropolis sign falls on a dignitary. It looks like it's about to, land on him when Superman saves it.
Got it.
And the foreign dignitary tells him, "Oh, like you grabbed that sign from falling on me just in the nick of time. Like, I'm going to donate my crown jewels to the charity you named. Just let me know."
Wow. What a
and
guy.
it's just, hey, Superman being Superman. Somebody who's walking by is just like, he'll name nothing for you, Highness. Like, Superman can't give anything away. He owes every cent that he gets to the U.S. government. He's a tax evader. And so we find out right now, we set the scene for our Superman story.
This is already the dumbest story.
No, you mean the greatest.
Okay.
So it talks about that one day at the IRS bureau in Metropolis. Apparently, Metropolis has a IRS bureau itself.
Uh-huh.
We're introduced to a new worker, or a new agent, I guess, who works there, named Rupert Brand.
He is a revenue agent. It
He
says
is.
on his little thing there.
And he says that each year Superman captures countless wanted criminals, and he collects a fortune in the reward money. Then whenever
does?
This is what he says. Then whenever he digs up buried treasure or he squeezes coal into diamonds, he earns even more untold millions.
I have never.
All that wealth is income, is what he brings up.
I have never heard that Superman collected a bounty.
So according to this IRS agent, he does.
Ugh.
And so Rupert Brand says, even though he gives these billions to charity and never keeps a cent for himself, the law says no one can claim more than 15% of their income for charity exemptions. So Superman is guilty of income tax evasion and must pay up. How can the government build schools and highways if no one paid taxes?
Yeah, Amazon.
So Rupert Brand is taking it upon himself. He's like, Superman's gonna pay taxes. But just to show you how, like, what Superman's actually worried about, it shows that Superman's out in space.
I think this guy needs to lay down with
kind
somebody,
of a little bit. And there's a comet that's like screeching towards Earth, and Superman, in typical Silver Age Superman fashion, punches the comet back out into space, right?
Yeah.
But
do you remember that very special episode of Full House where they punch Comet?
Where Donnie the
cousin,
Tanner.
Donnie the cousin came in from out of town and punched the dog right in the face. Yeah,
is Donnie Tanner like Rod Belding?
A very special episode of Full House. Right after this.
Oh,
Wait,
man.
is that what it's called? Yeah, Full House.
Yeah, Full House. I was always a
I
Family
was
Matters
about to
guy.
say Different Strokes, which
No, that was
that's an
older.
entirely different show.
I was always a Family Matters guy, though. I watched Urkel and
Yeah, that
Carl
was
and
better.
Eddie and
Full
Lisa
House
and,
always
yeah.
made me throw up
Like,
every time.
that was the reaction?
Yeah. Just sometimes it was just dry heaves.
Was it just like the theme music
Just like
started?
that.
It's like, whatever
Whatever
happened to
happened-
yeah,
Yeah, just like
I
that,
got you.
That was a terrible show, by the way. I know it was part of people's childhood and stuff,
yeah.
but man, that was
Some of that
was
nostalgia
rough.
stuff, yeah.
It was gross. Yeah.
So, Superman.
Cut it out.
Nice one, Dave Coulier.
Mhm.
So Superman punches the comet back out into space, and he's like, "Oh, there's this weird kind of gaseous tail that's gonna come by still, but it's gonna pass through Earth, and it's not gonna affect everybody. I've saved the day. We're good.
That's what I used to say about my
Hey.
grandfather. He had a gaseous tail.
Hey, what's that on the comet over there? It's an egg, huh? Some
An
creature,
egg?
yeah, some creature must have forgot it there. I'll go ahead and keep it in my cape
Some
here.
creature must have forgot it.
I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah, I get it.
he does, he does, some space or some winged space creature must have left it here to hatch.
Uh-huh.
See? So,
I put it in the pouch of my cape, which I've never mentioned before.
well, this is the 60s, Mike. It's
Yeah.
on you for not knowing he had a pouch. in it.
Sure.
Then we go back to Earth where
The next panel is maybe one of the craziest things I've ever seen.
he's using ladders as stilts.
Wait.
That
yes,
one?
He's using 2 ladders. 2 solid ladders. They're not even sliding ladders.
No.
They're solid ladders.
And they're like
he's got
at
them
least-
up under his
They're
armpits.
2 stories high at
and
least.
he's ding, ding, ding.
And he's
like
just walking to stilts. It's because it's give to the firemen's welfare fund. Superman in person. He's appearing for this charity event.
But can't he just have the fireman down there? Because dude can fly. Why is he using 2 ladders?
He's showing off, Mike. So
He needs to pay his taxes.
while he's there to help out, which by the way, I love the panel of they're holding like I think of Dumbo
Yeah.
with the giant like net kind of thing that they catch the people on that bounces.
Yeah.
But it's covered in money. It's like, hey, people throw dollar bills out of your window and we'll catch it on this net. Like I would think a small breeze would like just blow away everything they earned that day.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
But
Either that or you got a bunch of sticky bills.
and I don't want to know why they are.
No.
But while we're there,
The guy says, a man jumped off that building.
he just jumps off a
And
building and goes, help, help. And
He's
Superman
saying help.
sees
Why
it.
did he jump?
And Superman sees it and goes, here, take this. I'm going to go save him. And he goes over there and he rescues the guy that jumped. And he goes, easy, chum. I've got you. Did you lose your balance up there? Like, you okay? What's up?
Oh.
And we find out, and he says, of course not. I deliberately leaped from this roof. I knew that you'd be here to save me if I fell, because this is Rupert Brand, our new IRS agent that we've been introduced to.
What a dipshit.
And he tells him, I'm Rupert Brand, U.S. Revenue Agent. I didn't want to waste a second looking for you. He's like, I didn't want to have to find you, so I just jumped off a roof and thought you'd come get me. Is essentially what he's telling. He's like, I know, like without saying it, he's like, I know you save people like this all the time. You were going to save me.
Well, not only that, he's got this big diatribe about how you're a tax evader as Superman's holding him, flying him around. If I was Superman, I'd just chunk him in the sun.
Like that's the thing.
Throw him into the sun.
Is I read an article talking about this issue somewhere else, and the
Yeah.
person writing it put like, what would be even funnier is if the next panel is just like Superman, oops, and like he's not there anymore.
Yeah, no
of
kidding.
Just like him, like
Yeah.
he slipped, like
Yeah, sorry, guys.
But that's the thing. So Rupert tells him about that he's a tax evader, and it kind of boggles Superman, and he's
You
like,
just go, look, Brainiac, and you
Yeah.
drop him or something, and you fly off
Exactly.
real fast.
but he's like, I've never been asked to pay taxes before. And then the Rupert's like, well, it's about time that somebody kind of told you to. Then even the president pays taxes.
Oh my God,
You
does
think
he?
That's what he
Nah,
says.
I don't think so.
He goes, so why should you be the only exception? And then he tells him, fly me to my office and we'll add up what you owe me. And Superman's like, okay. And so he flies him to the IRS office and they get done tallying it all up. And he tells him, Superman, noon tomorrow is the tax
That's
deadline.
what I love about this.
If you don't deliver $1 billion
by noon,
which includes your back taxes,
tomorrow.
I'll order the FBI to arrest you.
Oh, that should
If
go
you're
well.
the FBI, how do you want to get that call? Be like, hey, Superman owes $1 billion in taxes and he's not going to pay it. We got to go arrest him. Are you just like, I think I'm getting sick.
Yeah.
I'm not coming in tomorrow.
Take his crypto ass in.
Oh, man. And Superman tells him, like, I don't have much time. All right, I got to go do something. So, in typical Silver Age fashion, I love the
is
zaniness. I
insanity.
know, and that's why I love it. It says soon in the Congo jungle, and Superman.
You should never send me these comics because this is ridiculous.
I know.
I can't help but read,
ahead.
Yeah.
I know. But Superman picks up like this giant fort and it says like, I must find all these valuables. Like, here, I'll use this abandoned Legion outpost. I remember an elephant graveyard that I spotted during my travels. So he takes this fort to an elephant graveyard because Superman didn't kill the elephants, but it's okay if he benefits.
Shoot.
It's okay
I
if
didn't
he
realize
naturally
that.
benefits off of what happens when they
So
die.
he gets a French Foreign Legion fort, and it's still got the ground attached.
It
by the
does.
way, he
And
picks
he
it up
flies
and
into
then he
the
just
jungle
fills it full of
of
illegal ivory.
So he finds elephant graveyard where there are all these elephant bones and all this ivory, and he loads it to the brim. Like, you see where he's flying it is full with ivory. Like, that he is just flying a fort full of ivory Superman has. And he's like, I don't know if this is enough, but it'll help some. And when he gets there and he lands and he sets it down, who shows up but Superman's best friend, Bizarro. And Bizarro says, hey, Superman, like, it's me, Bizarro. He always introduces himself. And he's like, I saw the problems you had, so I'm going to use my duplicator ray to help you out. And it'll duplicate this to all the ivory you need. And Superman's like, no, Bizarro, your rays, like, it only makes imperfect perfections. Like, you're going to get this wrong. And sure enough, Bizarro's ray turns, as Superman says, look what you've done, Bizarro.
Bizarro, you've done it again.
You've turned my pile of solid ivory into a mound of ivory soap. And Bizarro goes,
By the way, ivory's a brand. Okay.
And he goes, you know what is good? Ivory soap is better than ivory. Tusk, it floats. And then Bizarro leaves mad, and Superman's just flying around with bars full of soap. Then,
Why is he so friggin' stupid?
All right, this doesn't work. So then he lands, he goes and he sets this egg that he had in his Superman pouch down on the island. He's like, you stay here. I got to go do some other things.
Because he heard a crackling sound, it says.
Oh, yeah, he heard a crackling
I heard
sound.
a crackling.
So
Got to
he
get that
sets it
out of my
down.
cape.
So he goes to Metropolis and he goes to the coal company and they're like, yeah, Superman, you can help yourself to all the coal you want to. And he goes to try to turn this coal into diamonds and it crumbles in his hand. He's like, it must be that gaseous tail from the comet that's like messing with the coal here in the atmosphere. So he can't turn coal into diamonds right now. So he calls his friend Aquaman and he's like, hey, I want to find the world's largest pearl. That'll help me out. Like, find me the world's largest clam then. Aquaman's like, you got it, buddy. And then he goes and sees Dr. Potter. Superman goes and sees Dr. Potter. But I think we've talked about once before in the old Superboy comic. Like, I think he made like a robot or like there was something.
Well,
it was the Ray.
Giant Jimmy.
He was the one. Yeah, he made a giant Jimmy here, but he was also the one who made the Ray that made.
Sounds like something you got to pay extra for.
That made
giant
Bizarro.
Jimmy.
Remember?
Oh yeah. That's right.
That was Dr. Potter there too.
Yeah, Dr. Potter's kind of an F up too.
Yes. Well, we find out that Superman's plan is to use this formula that Dr. Potter is making to essentially make the world's biggest pearl. So Aquaman locates the world's largest clam. And they use the fluid that Dr. Potter gave him, and it's supposed to grow the world's largest pearl, right? So he's going to do that because he's got to try to find $1 billion. This is still the same, like 24 hours we're going on.
Yeah.
When he goes back to the island where he was keeping the egg, it's turned into a giant lizard creature.
Yeah. Winged lizard.
Then he goes down and he finds a sunken ship underwater where there's a bunch of gold.
Hang on. Not only did it turn into a lizard, his solution to that is I'm going to sell that lizard to a private collector.
He does say that.
Yeah.
Then he notices in a sunken
for pet or meat.
For pet or meat. He doesn't specify. A sunken like ship, and there's gold on there, and he's about to swim away with it when he's interrupted by Lori, the Atlantis mermaid, and a group of other Atlanteans who are like, "Oh, Superman, we really needed that gold. Like we were going to use it." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, since you guys wanted it first." And he gives it to him, and Lori doesn't tell him what she's using it for. And it turns out they were using the gold to make statues of Superman's parents as a thank you for helping him.
I love the fact that Lori has a dress on underwater.
And a tail?
Yeah. So she's got like a 50s housewife dress, and then right under the dress comes out her big old tail.
Fish tail, yeah.
So weird looking.
But yeah, she's like, hey, here's Jor-El and Lara, your parents. And if I'm Superman, I'm like, cool. The gold that I was going to use to pay off my taxes, you turned into giant statues. But thank you.
Fish punks.
No. So he thanks them, is like, oh, that's really nice of him. But then he also finds on the sunken ship like other like art and treasure and stuff like that. And that's what he keeps doing. He keeps flying around to try to find all these antiquities. And he goes and he keeps like dropping them off on the island. And he'll go and he'll find more. And he takes it back and drops them off. He's like, oh, I heard that like radium was really big. They could use a lot of radium. I'll go find that. And he goes to take it back. Radium. And he goes to take it back and he gets a report that, oh, but they're using radium for like radium therapy that they're helping to cure some disease. And there's a shortage. I got to go give that back. Like, I don't want to take away from, what they're doing. So he goes and kind of helps deliver radium to the hospitals. And when he comes back to kind of see the bounty that he has left, that giant winged creature?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a matter-eating animal, and it has eaten everything on the island. So that's what he says. Holy jumping Jupiter. That creature, he's devouring everything in sight, including the island. He's a matter eater with an insatiable appetite. He'll eat anything and has. So Superman in anger just kind of throws the monster into space. Like you see him just hurling there.
Yeah, he just chunks him.
And it says, however, amazingly, a few minutes before noon, and he shows up with a check to pay Rupert Brand, the IRS agent. And he's like, you have the money? And he goes, yeah, here you go. And then Rupert looks at the check and he goes, are you mad, Superman? This check is worthless. It was issued by the Bank of Krypton, your home world, which blew up long ago. You can't cash this. So it seems like Superman's like, I'll just write a check on my Bank of Krypton account.
I love the fact that if this is canonical,
yeah,
Superman came to Earth as a baby,
yeah,
with a checkbook.
Yeah.
Is that what just happened?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But about that time, it says suddenly Brand's boss enters and he's like, we're not going to, Brand. Like, Superman told me about his problem and I told him not to worry about it. I told him to do that as a gag. But he's like, what are you talking about?
Gag?
Yeah, he goes, Superman doesn't have to pay taxes because of code 1426B. And Rupert goes, the tax dependency clause? But Superman has no family or dependents. And his boss says, or hasn't he? Our records show that Superman has for years supported billions of needy people with clothing, housing, food, and protective services. Indeed, the whole world is dependent on him. And according to the law, every taxpayer is allowed to deduct $600 for each dependent. That's right. According to the boss, Rupert's boss, we are all Superman's dependents because he saves us. And he gets $600 for all those dependents. And he's like, so really, like, we should be paying him, but we really can't pay him for that. But he doesn't have to owe taxes, essentially. Rupert shakes and he's like, gosh, I never thought of it that way. Forgive me, Superman. I should have known you couldn't be a tax evader. And the guy goes, you bet. Anything the U.S. is, if anything, the U.S. is indebted to Superman. If only there isn't enough money in the world to pay him for what he does.
My God.
So Superman is tax exempt, I guess.
We have read some really dumb things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tax time special.
I'm gonna say that this is the stupidest.
Really?
It really is. Out of everything we've read.
Out of everything.
Here's why I say that. Children love taxes. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, all of his ideas were stupid. Very stupid. Number three,
I loved it.
Man jumps off building to prove a point.
Lois Lane has done that.
Yeah, well, she's different.
I'm just saying,
it's a tax guy that we just met.
Lois to do it, but
whoops,
not an IRS agent.
help. Oh, I knew you'd be there.
That
now,
is
let me
fun.
tell you why you're a terrible person.
Me?
No.
Oh,
no,
you're
I'm
talking
saying,
about IRS cat.
yeah.
I thought you were going to be like,
It's
that's why I hated the
ridiculous.
comic. Now let me tell you why you're a terrible person.
God almighty.
But, so there you go. That is I looked high and low. There was also like a Canadian tax comic for like Captain Tax Time. I just couldn't find
Captain Tax Time.
or something like that like a tax prep place put out. I just couldn't find a copy of it, but so I had to find that.
What a stupid loophole, too. Like, oh, he supports everybody on the planet.
We're
We
all
owe
his
him.
dependents. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you
Okay.
go. All right. So that is your Tax Time comic. We're gonna go ahead and take a break.
That was great, though. Thank
Yeah.
you. It was terrible, but it was great.
It was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and take a break, but when we come back,
No sweetmeat.
no. See, you want to talk about bad stuff?
Somebody needs to tax sweetmeat
Ugh.
for the wear and tear on my eyeballs.
Ugh. But something that's going to be a lot better than that. When we come back, we'll go ahead and talk with Reed Tucker author of Slugfest,
Slugfest.
50-year battle between Marvel and DC. We'll get into that right after the break, right here on Bros, Foes, and Heroes. Welcome back into Bros, Foes, and Heroes. All right, so we talked tax time with Superman, and now it is time for us to dive into the meat of our show today, our interview with author Reed Tucker. Joined now by Reed Tucker, journalist and author. The book that we've talked about a lot that we love here on the show, Slugfest, Inside the Epic 50-Year Battle Between Marvel and DC. Also, though, I know, Reed, because you mentioned it in the book, too, that you worked covering movies for the New York Post for about a decade there then, too, but just a lot of writing there, and I am so just thankful and happy to have you on the show here with us, and thank you for giving the time and hopping on with us.
No, please. It's my pleasure to be with you, and it's nice to talk to someone who's read the book.
I'm actually in anticipation of us talking. I started my my third read through of it. Just to kind of refresh things, because the thing is it's so chock full of so much that there's so many things we could dive into, because you start back, obviously, with, Marvel kind of becoming Marvel Comics there in the 60s, but even before that, of setting up how DC is all into that and getting into the battle between them from the get-go then of 50, now almost, I guess, 60 years. One of the funny things to me, at least early on, is just how out of touch DC seemed to be with trying to figure out why Marvel was doing the things they were. The meetings of, was it the covers that were selling things? Was it the colors, the amount of word balloons, just all the different things? It at least seemed to me, and I just wanted to get your opinion then through all this, of just at least super early on in the 60s, and then even it kind of carries with them through on, that they're always just a little behind when it comes to keeping up with Marvel.
No, it's true, and that was one of my favorite parts of the story as well. But I realized putting together the book is like, fans working in the comic strip industry is a reasonably new development. If you probably the first one was Nelson Bridwell in 1964, then Roy Thomas, and so the people who were working as comic editors back then, in the 30s and 40s and 50s when DC was on top, they were not fans. In fact, they kind of disdain the comic medium. There's famous stories about some of the editors and Stan Lee going to parties and never wanting to admit that they actually worked in the comic book business because it was so disreputable. And so if you look at who was on the DC roster in terms of editors at that time when Marvel was really making its waves in the superhero business in the early 60s, you've got guys like, Murray Boltinoff and these guys who basically wore tweed jackets and smoked pipes and dreamed of writing poetry. They were not superhero fans. And so they were really not well equipped to figure out what was going on with Marvel, why Marvel was really overtaking them in sales, and what the readership really loved about Marvel. So it wasn't until the fans started taking their place in the 70s and 80s that DC really sort of was able to turn the ship.
And kind of, and the 80s there, I think one of the big things, because it's where I was telling you about, I'm in my reread, I'm into the point now where we're getting through direct distribution there in the 80s, which seems to be obviously a big thing then when DC decided to go fully, focus more on that, and that kind of seemed to help them then before obviously the 90s kind of came around. But one of the big aspects of this rivalry that was always also kind of, interesting and reading through was the almost of the ceiling of talent back and forth throughout the years. One of the biggest ones that can be in its just story itself of just Jack Kirby and the way, he went and things worked at DC and then came back to Marvel. I just like the stories of it. It's almost an industry of where you can't say that about a lot of industries, where giants will come, work for a long time in one, go work for a long time in another, bounce back and forth, and can stand or hold company lines at different times against the other.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. It really was probably until the 1980s, the comic book industry was really small. It really was a mom and pop industry, and there were a handful of writers and artists who were all friends with each other. They often played poker together or hung out with one another. They were roommates with one another. And like you said, they really did move back and forth between those two companies because there was Charlton up in Connecticut and a couple other publishers, but mostly it was those were the only two games in town were Marvel and DC, and so they just did jump back and forth, including, as you mentioned, Jack Kirby. He was probably the biggest affection maybe of all time.
Yeah, and just part of leading into the Kirby story that adds to the kind of the what's the word? Not conspiracy, but the like espionage between the two of them. There's the story of once he went to DC. I think I don't want to say. I think the story goes it was Vinnie Coletta, whoever it was that was working freelancing over there at the time of taking the pictures of the work over there at DC and bringing it back to Marvel. Just the things like that of just it's so weird to see and hear these stories in an industry where you're just thinking of like, oh, hey, I'm going to go at that time find my Fantastic Four, my Captain America off the rack, and not knowing just all the just the battle back and forth between these companies for that rack space any way they could get it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's so weird to hear stealing secrets and spies and all this stuff. But I mean, there was a lot of that over the years. There's another story that I really loved in the book, which was, in the early 1970s when Carmine Infantino was running DC, and he discovered that there was some mole inside DC who was leaking DC's future publishing plans to some of the fanzines that had cropped up. And so he got angry that this word was getting out before he wanted to release it. And so they really launched this like CIA style sting operation where they printed up fake memos, like misinformation that they planted around the office in hopes that the spy would take it and leak it to the fanzines. And sure enough, they did. So these memos talked about these fake plans that DC was going to launch these massive, giant comic books they called Blockbuster. So if you look at the fanzines back at the time, there are some news bulletins that you can still find in them talking about DC's plans that were then leaked by this spy. And so this is how they caught the spy. And I don't know if he was executed or what happened to him. I tried to find out, but I think it's comic books. They were just probably like, don't do it again.
Yeah.
That's very true. But I love that story in the book too, of just how it's like, the memo just kind of left around the office there. With writing all these stories and collecting all these, I'm sure that there were, I think I heard you say in an interview once that you had to keep it to kind of a word limit. So I'm sure there's stories that you weren't, kind of able to get to or had to trim and cut there. Is there things that, you look back now or not want to say, because the book is great the way it is, but if you could add anything else into it, like, is there something that you're like, I wish I would have touched on this more?
No, you're right. I mean, it's such a big story. And so I had to decide early on, like, what I was going to cover. And I mean, I guess I wish I had been able to delve more into the movies, because that's really now where the rivalry lives. There are not that many hardcore comic book readers anymore. And I think a lot of them, aren't like when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. They really were, I'm diehard DC or I'm diehard Marvel. So there was that antagonism between the two types of readers. Whereas I think now, if you read comic books, it's such a small pool, they probably read everything. So my one regret is probably I couldn't delve into the movies more. But like you said, it's, when you write a book, you do have a word limit, and that was just biting off more than I could chew.
I get you. That the movies and even like anime, there's so much just different stuff that they've done there in like film and TV that I would think you could obviously have a field day with, of being able to dive into all the intricacies of it. Speaking of, I mean, with you being a movie guy, how do you feel about James Gunn taking over the DCEU, or just I think they're still calling it the DCEU. I could be wrong there. Is that something that you think will, I don't know if anything's going to like re-energize a rivalry, but do you think that good DC movies could kind of add to that?
I definitely think so. I mean, DC movies have been so terrible for so long.
Yeah.
They really have become an afterthought. I mean, Marvel has clearly won that battle. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to see what James Gunn does. I mean, I think it was pretty clear early on, certainly to viewers and maybe to those inside Warner Brothers, that the whole Zack Snyder universe had failed. I mean, it had its hardcore fans, and bless them, but in terms of like broad appeal to a wide audience, I don't think they had it. And so they were kind of stuck. They had launched this interconnected universe based on this one person's vision, and they had rolled out plans for all these other movies that were going to come. And I think they knew, like, oh man. So then they splintered that a little bit, and they started to do these one-off movies. You know, the Joker and the Batman doesn't really exist in that world, and so they had some success with that. But I do think there's real value to having that interconnected universe. And if fans like it and they buy into it and they want to see what happens next in terms of storytelling, it's a huge boost. So I think they did great by restarting and hiring James Gunn.
I've always thought that James Gunn did a really good job of digging up like those characters that nobody really knows much about, like Polka Dot Man and things like that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where his genius lies, in the fact that those characters, who cares? You know, I can build whatever I want around these people and like make them part of this group. Even Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't the biggest property in the world, you know, when he first did the movie. And so, you know, a lot of us, especially my age, I didn't know what to expect going in. And I think it's probably the greatest superhero movie that he's made. I mean, the first one to me was such a surprise and such a fun time at the movies, you know, with anything that I had ever seen as far as comic book goes. It goes back to the original Superman for me, you know, with Christopher Reeve. I mean, that was fun. And once again, he had brought fun back to these comic book movies, you know, and so I'm excited about that, but I also have a little bit of trepidation because now he's handling a property like Superman, which notoriously hard to make Superman cool. And so that's going to be something.
I'd argue that, but
yeah, well, give me one example.
we've spent a whole month talking about examples. Mike.
No, I'm talking movies, not comic books.
Sorry.
Comic books, it seems a lot easier. When you start putting the underwear on the outside of a guy and filming him, that's a little bit different, you know?
Well, maybe they're not going to try to make him cool. Maybe they're going to go back to, like you said, the original Christopher Reeve.
And that's
Superman,
what
really
I would. That's what I would do. Lean into it. You know, he's a big geek. Who cares? Lean into it. You know, that's how you make him cool. You make him so uncool that he's cool.
I agree. The Zack Snyder vision of Superman killing people and being dark,
come on.
I don't think resonated with me at all. And so I do think James Gunn has much more reverence for the material and for where Superman came from, and will take it closer to the.
Yeah,
I think that's your difference. I think that's your difference right there. Is you've got a comic book fan making comic book movies.
It's funny that you brought up the Snyder and the killing of Zod thing, because we've spent, like I kind of said, covering comics. We talked about, I did a whole thing of what I dubbed Superman stories that don't suck, like Alan Moore's, you know, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, or, you know, Joe Kelly's Action Comics, you know, just finding the stories that really capture that Superman mythos thing. And so it can be done. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens there. One thing that the stories that just kind of get me, that I want to get your opinion on in reading through this, is, and this one is always, I've never read them, and maybe that's partly on me and I should dive in to see what they're all about, but it still always strikes me as strange. When Marvel is going through their bankruptcy, I think it's Ike Perlmutter, you mentioned the book, finds out that they're kind of almost double paying Stan Lee in a bit, or they have like two different contracts for him, and they end up canceling one of them, and it sets up kind of, or put things into motion of where he goes and he's able to kind of reimagine the DC universe in his own way. Things like that, like, is that just, how do I put, I just, things like that happening seems to always be, it goes throughout the companies in the book here. They're always trying to find one way to at least get something from the other company. DC using Stan Lee's name when they can, even if the books aren't that great, or even, you know, the stealing of writers. It seems like each company was always trying to find some way to at least, if they could, build off the other in a sense.
Probably right. Yeah, and those Just Imagine Stan Lee series of books, don't read them. Those are really not good. But you're right. I mean, those grew out of kind of a contract dispute that Stan Lee was having, and yeah, exactly. A lot of what the other company is always trying to do is make a splash at the expense of their rival, and nabbing Stan Lee, who, you know, was basically synonymous with Marvel in most people's eyes, was a huge coup for them. But then I don't think they really knew what to do with him at that point. And also, I mean, he's a very busy person. He's lived out in LA since the early 80s trying to get movies off the ground. He hasn't written comic books in decades. And so, you know, they put him together with a team of artists. And when I talked to those artists and asked them, like, well, how much did Stan Lee really do? They were like, well, you know, we got on a phone call with him, and, you know, he kind of puts his name on it. But You know, DC had been trying to get Stan Lee for a long time. There was a point in the early 70s where he almost went over there after he fell out with the management at Marvel, but it didn't work out. So there have been times over the years where he has considered it. But when they finally did get him, it had, like you said, it kind of fizzled.
Yeah.
That would have been such a coup. I mean, that would have been so. Well, it's like it's the James Gunn thing. Honestly, it's the same thing.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up to you when you talk about coups like this, or the things that could have almost happened. There's a story in the book too about, I think, Bill Sarnoff calling Jim Shooter, who's the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time back in 1984, talking about them licensing the characters for Marvel to print DC Comics. Like, it got to the point where DC had figured, hey, we can do licensing really good for our characters, but you guys do better with the comic books. And then, Marvel, he took it to, I think, was it Jim Galton, his boss at the time, who was like, well, if they can't sell them, we can't, just kind of by making a too short kind of, version of the story. Yeah. But just small little things like this, one way or another, could have changed the landscape so much.
It's true. Yeah. And you're right. You hit on something really kind of important throughout the industry is this, like, when the publishers went from being these kind of mom and pop businesses to being consumed by these like huge multinational corporations, the people who were really in charge of DC Comics or in charge of Marvel Comics didn't care about comics. And so, the people at DC are sitting up in an office somewhere in Rockefeller Center, and they're looking at the numbers, and they're like, why are we spending all this money publishing Superman? We've got decades worth of Superman material here that we can just republish. And for the kids who are just coming into comics, it's new to them. Why are we wasting our time and money hiring people to create new stories? And I think Jeanette Kahn, to her credit, told them, look, this is like an R&D lab. We are creating new stories, and you have no idea what you're going to be able to do with them. Movies or TV shows or video games. So, it's a very small sort of rounding number for you, Warner Brothers. You should keep this going. And I think that proved incredibly, incredibly smart on her part. If you look at what's being mined now for these multi-billion-dollar movie franchises, it's all stuff that was created by these people who were probably making $100 a page, back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that it's kind of sad. There's no way to put it when you kind of look back at some of these creators and what they had to deal with, and then what happens there with the work. It's interesting. I appreciate your time, and I'll go ahead and kind of close out here with just the last couple questions. But I like that you brought up Jeanette Kahn, because that leads into my next question of where reading through the book, the thing that I liked with all these stories is you get to find, about more of the people that are kind of in the inner workings. Like, as a comic book fan, I know my artist and my writer, but I didn't necessarily know like what Jeanette Kahn did, what, these guys or the Mark Grunwalds, the different, just the names you can throw out of the people behind the scenes did, and the stories that are in the book, just to kind of tell the story of both Marvel and DC. It's just some of my favorite part of it. I guess my question is, in, researching and doing this book, who was it, or is there somebody that you were like, wow, I'm glad that I was able to at least find like this story or this part to kind of put in the book that I didn't know before going into it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have one answer, but I think what you said, I also agree with. There were a lot of people who were in the background, and even some of the artists and writers who were in the foreground that I did not know that much about, especially, back in the golden age of comics and the silver age of comics, because I wasn't alive then. But, like you said, certainly finding out more about them gave me much more of an appreciation about them. Starting with, like you said, Jeanette Kahn, really what she did in terms of righting the ship at DC, bringing in different kinds of ideas, changing the culture and the personality of DC. I mean, it's huge. I mean, I don't know if they would have gone out of business because, like you said, they had licensing and that sort of thing. But it was definitely teetering on the edge. Jim Shooter is another one. Like most people, not most people, but there are a lot of people in the comic business who don't like him because, he's kind of brusque person to deal with. But if you look at what he did for Marvel, he's an incredible person. He's an incredible editor and writer and just manager. So I don't think that anyone can argue that those two people are incredibly influential.
No, I completely agree with you on that. And Jim Shooter, another one that the more that I've learned about, I mean, he was writing comics when he was a teenager. Like,
13.
Exactly. And the fact that he had to deal with, I'm blanking on not Carmine Infantino. Oh, who was the Marv?
Mort Weisinger.
Mort Weisinger. Yeah, the fact that he had to deal with Mort Weisinger just insulting him all the time. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories, and it's probably just not real, but just the story to tell was the funeral story of Weisinger's, of where they ask they allow for people to kind of stand up and say nice things about him, and nobody does, and eventually somebody stands up and says, "Well, his brother was worse." Like it just the scene of setting up that Mad Men type like 60s DC offices of the suit and ties of it just doesn't fit with everything else that you kind of had in mind as you kind of brought up there with the comic book world. But Reed Tucker, again, the book Slugfest, inside the epic 50-year battle between Marvel and DC. Journalist and author, and Reed, I can't thank you enough. Again, this was great. I appreciate it very much, you taking the time out to talk to us. I can't praise the book enough. I love it. I'm going to finish my third read through here, and probably recommend it to more people. Anything else that you have that you're working on that you would like to kind of go ahead and throw out there as well, though, while we have you?
I'm trying to write a story on this guy Nelson Bridwell, who was he was an editor. He was an assistant Superman editor at DC from 1964 until 1987 when he died. And he's a fascinating character. So I wrote something for Alter Ego magazine, which is Roy Thomas's magazine, that should come out at the end of the year.
Ooh, perfect.
Oh, that's excellent.
So I got the plug. I wish it had more.
No, that's great.
We like it. I'll be looking forward to make sure to read that. Mr. Tucker, I can't tell you again. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for hopping on with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to talk to you guys, and I appreciate the nice words about the book.
All right. Again, another thank you to Reed Tucker for joining us.
Great.
And I like that. And I think that's something we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm working on something. I have contact information for
Santa.
I do there.
Oh.
We've had him on the show before, remember?
Did we?
Yeah, way back. Okay, I'm going to boggle your mind. Way back over on... No, it was... Okay, so it was just the place right before here. You had him on phone.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
You called him while we
did
were
call
doing,
Santa.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Thanks,
we have
Santa.
had Santa on the phone once before. I don't remember what. It had to be one of the Christmas ones. I don't even remember what we covered.
We called him in July.
Well, it was Christmas in July.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks to Reed Tucker again. And
yeah, man, he was fantastic. And you know what? The thing with Reed Tucker, I reached out, he responded right away, and we set up it was like no time.
Oh,
he was just like,
nice.
"Yep, I got you. I got about 20 minutes." I was great.
Yep, super nice. And the beauty of it is too, he
Wonderful
also very nice, and also helped us out sports wise too. Like he's just a guy that. Thanks to him. Thanks for you guys
Reed.
for listening to our silly Superman story. Coming up next week, I can tell you we don't have Superman. He makes a small appearance in what we have next week, but it's not Superman centric for a while. I showed Mike. I have the schedule planned out until August, so we have a lot of stuff planned out, and I can tell you maybe a little bit of appearances just in storylines here or there, but we're done with Superman for a while after we got done with our series of really good stories. But still,
Well, next week it's what? Aquaman adopts a dog?
Yeah, it is. It's Aquaman adopts a dog. No, it is whatever happened. It's kind of a sequel to not a sequel. What do you call it? Where it's like it's based off of. It's like a I can't think of the word.
So
a spiritual successor, kind of.
What are we talking about?
We covered whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow about one more.
Yeah.
And now I think next week we're gonna dive into whatever happened to the Cape Crusader by Neil Gaiman, which is his 2009 story of the funeral of Batman, which is actually really good.
Yeah.
So we get into Gaiman, and then also after that, the one I'm really looking forward to, somebody who I started just because I wanted to try to prep us better for the DCU, and it's a character that I've fallen in love with now just reading.
Oh.
And I can't wait to get to, and that's Booster Gold. So Booster Gold after that to close out the month of April.
Zero.
So I can't wait to get into that. But there you go. That's it for our show. As always, thank you guys for taking the time out to listen. Also, make sure to check out a lot of the other great podcasts on the Rogue Media Network family of stations.
RogueMediaNetwork.com.
And until next time, stay safe, everybody.
Golly con, everybody.
Frozen heroes. Gonna tell you about frozen heroes. Gonna tell you about
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.